We're going to be doing a session called Jumping Off a Cliff. Everything you want to know about founding a startup, but we're afraid to ask. Now, I'm going to give you a little backstory while George is getting the panel set up. We do have a little bit of a time gap between this and the next session. We did this because I know some of you out there have to urinate. I know it. I can see it. I can sense it. Yeah, that's right. You're laughing at home being like, how does he know that? That's weird. Look, I'm doing great. I'm fine. Are you great?
I'm surprised you don't have to go yet.
Yeah. So what we can do is just start letting people in as they come in the panel. But what's up, Adam? Are you judging us? Like, what did I walk into?
I love this. I was judging you. Okay. My biggest question is that real or not? I'm sure you already answered this, that mullet, John, but that was my biggest question.
He shaved it last night. Look at this. Turn sideways. Mullet cam.
It's impressive. That is amazing. What's up, George?
What's up, Adam? How are you?
Good, James.
How's it going?
James.
So,
good to meet
Good to see you guys.
do you guys know Ibrahim? Ibrahim, you're like the guy in the background that like helps all these startups, but no one knows. You're like Michael Clayton.
That's right. I usually have my camera off, but on today.
Oh, look at that. Look, this is exciting. All right. So I'm going to tell you guys while we're letting people come back, we put a little bit of a break in, like a little bit of a 3-minute buffer so people could like use the bathroom and stuff. But what I really want to do for this session is I realized we were missing material about stuff with starting a startup, being a founder, going through the ringer and figuring out how to do this stuff with building a company. And Adam and I have been doing a lot of conversations offline about this. And Adam's like, why don't we try and do this as a panel? And we're trying to stay away from the panel word. So what we're going to do is more confessions here. We're confessing today.
Confessional.
But we've got a pretty good crew. Real quick, I'm going to do introductions for people while we're waiting. Adam, do you want to be the guy? You're going to be the moderator because I have to cry on cue, right?
Thank you so much, Ryan, for doing this. But yeah, I'll start off by introducing myself. My name's Adam O'Donnell. I was a founder for about 7 years, moved to San Francisco to take it to the next level and crashed and burned around COVID. So I have a lot of interesting learnings. I've now been at Zendesk for startups for a couple years and working on their startups, go-to-market efforts. At the end of the day, we're trying to help startups with customer experience. But that's all I'm going to say about that. George, you want to pass it off and tell me your...
Hey everybody, George Soto here. Been doing startups now for about 23 years. Even though I think, I just grow my hair out so I look older. I am working on my 16th startup that I put together as a co-founder of some group of misfits. So that just tells you that these things at times can go sideways very quickly. And was in the Bay Area for a long time and returned to my hometown of Miami, Florida in 2019. I just want to give a shout out to a couple of folks out there. Of course, Adam, I love you, brother. We've never met in person yet. We hosted a podcast together. I feel like you're like my distant brother, although again, we've never met in person. Braden, of course. What's up, brother? Just excited to be here and talk shop.
I thought you were going to be like, I just want to give a shout out to my fellow Miami people. And then you're going to say hi to like Dwayne Wade and like Chris Bosch. And like, I was like, you know those people? All right, let's go to James Heller next. What's up, James?
What's going on? Thanks for having me. So James Heller, CEO and founder at Rapify. We're nation's leading rideshare media platform connecting out of home and media measurement. We went through the launch incubator with Mei Song at Lead IQ. That's actually how I got to meet Ryan, and we're longtime Lead IQ users now. The beginning stages of longtime Pitchfire users.
Hopefully,
Rapify was my first venture-backed startup. I started it almost 9 years ago. We sold a majority stake of the business in March of last year, so I'm an employee of the company I started. Which is an interesting new, version. So I'm the CEO and no longer like on the board and running the company. So yeah, very different experience, but fun in some ways, not fun in other ways. But yeah, it's really exciting to get to be here with all of you.
All right, and let's real quick, Ibrahim, I need you to unmute, dude. You're gonna have to talk to people. I know. Please don't bill me for this. Please.
I knew that joke was coming. Ibrahim El-Shami. I'm a startup lawyer. Worked with Ryan for a bit. Started out my life down the road from Ryan in New Hampshire. Made my way across the country to Silicon Valley for many years. Now I'm in Los Angeles. Work with startups of all different sizes, stages, industries, styles, you name it. Have seen the journey and have counseled on the journey many a time. And it's a difficult one. So excited to talk shop.
All right. And the unmute master himself, Braden Young. Sorry, Adam. I feel like I'm sharking your moderation. I'm a jerk.
No, you got it. You got it.
I got you. I'm Braden. I'm the co-founder of Sendoso. We're a gifting platform. So anything you might want to send out to a customer, all that fun stuff. I started about 8 years ago. I actually met Ryan. I think Ryan was like my first demo, I want to say. Like it was early. It was like 8 years ago. Yeah. So I've had some success since then. Grew it a lot. Shrank a little bit. Grew again. So a lot of stories I can share. Raised a lot of money. So I can talk about that. So I have some good stories I can share.
Just before Adam takes over on running the panel and stuff and all this in this discussion group, if you have questions about starting a startup, use the comment section, and we will post those comments. George, I cannot see the comment section, so our backstage guy, George, everyone wave to George really quick. You can't see him, but you're the pin guy. If you see anything that you want us to see and bring up,
Ryan, I thought you were referring to me, and I was like, "Holy shit! Did I miss an email?"
yeah, we didn't tell you. Yeah, so I told Adam about this, and like the big thing I kind of want to do is like I want people to know like where do you start? How did you guys all start your startup? I guess is kind of how we're thinking. Adam, you kind of go first here because you've done the startup thing before, right?
I did and was able to get a company to $1 million in ARR and then just got whacked and had to shut it down a couple of years later. It was one of the most challenging situations because I put my identity in being a successful founder despite just like going all out. And it felt like everything I could do, I did everything I could to make it work, and like just nothing worked. So that's like the humbling part of my story, honestly. And I feel like there was so many tears shed. There was so much just like frustration, pain, anger, all the things. So I can I ask a specific question to Braden, just as like an example of, because you have, y'all raised over $150 million. I remember y'all, by the way,
No
in 2018. Well, according to Crunchbase. But I feel like the problem with me is that I never had the big breakthrough moment as a founder. And but yet the more founders that I interview who've raised over $100 million, I run a podcast at Zendesk where I interview founders who've raised 100 plus. They all share that same frustration, but occasionally they get the breakthrough. And Braden, I think starting with you, I would love to hear maybe one of your lowest moments just in those super early days when you were like, I want to quit.
Yeah, I think the lowest moments don't really go away. I think like you kind of always have the thought in the back of your head that you're like, everyone just is like, I can't believe they're actually paying us for this thing. I mean, even when we were like 600 people at some point during COVID, and we were like, this is crazy. Like, you could hop on an all hands call, and you always had that thought, like, I don't know, like one of these days everyone's going to call us and be like, this is not working. I want my money back. And I think it's good that those thoughts never go away, because it kind of helps you continually innovate and continually push yourself. So that I would say is for sure like just a constant thought process. But early days, I think we had a customer who like wanted to use us, like I think at first 10 customers, and like they backed out right away. They're like, oh, we didn't get approval. And so you had those that you kind of learn from, and you get really every dollar is so important the first 6 months, first year. I mean, even now. And when you have one of those like fallout, you kind of have to convince yourself that what you're working on is actually a good thing. So you have to kind of like re-energize yourself. And I think having a co-founder to do it with, I think is a important thing that I had.
Hey, quick question for you guys. Who had co-founders when you started your startups? Raise your hand if you had a co-founder. I kind of did too. Everybody have one?
Had.
All right. How much does that help you? Like, go into that, Braden, a little bit. That was kind of interesting. So like you basically like, what do you guys do? You just complain together and hold each other and cry, or what happens?
Well, I think trust is an important one. So like I never had to like convince myself that Chris was actually working as hard as I was, because like we knew each other from like being in sales roles. So I think that's important, is trust. Secondly, yeah, someone to complain with, but also someone to just kind of like wrap stuff out with, like, hey, I want to try this. Someone to have like beers with and be like, hey, I think we're in the right direction, but like, what if we pivoted this? So it's kind of like it's like through the years, like my wife's like probably like the number one person I talk to on my phone, then like Chris. It's been that way for like 8 years, and then probably my mom. So I think like those are important to have like very open dialogue, and it just helps with building, helps with innovating, helps with kind of keeping a level head, and then know like what motivates them. I think things like that helps, and they need to know the same about you because it helps with building, because like there's stressful days for sure. All
right, I gotta ask this out of curiosity, since we have legal resources here. Let's say you want to start something. How do you actually do it? Like legally? Ibrahim, you want to do that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, at the beginning, I mean, it's just an idea, right? And I think fundamentally you want to know that the idea is actually something you can make into a business. And so, you know, did you come up with that idea when you're working at, you know, Google or Uber or something like that? Is it related to that business? Can you actually go out and spin that out and do something on your own? Can your co-founder do that? So there's, you know, considerations there to make sure that what you're trying to start is clean. But say you make it past that, I think you're trying to set up a company so that it can be the repository of all the intellectual property you create. It can start to dictate how control of the company is supposed to work. Early on, it seems funny because it's like the control is just us. It's just me and my co-founder. But part of it is you're trying to set the stage for the life of the company and how decisions are made and who has to decide on stuff, how you're splitting the pie if there's an exit. So there's really consequential decisions right out the bat. And so you put together a company, you kind of decide on all that stuff. And then you're trying to hire people to help you build it, and making sure, again, that you're protecting the ideas that are being created, that people can't just walk away and bring that to some other company. They can't breach confidentiality without some kind of consequence to themselves. They have upside. Maybe that's salary, bonus, equity, however that looks. You know, fast forward, let's say, you know, you've been running a company for several years and suddenly you have some employee that, you know, is disgruntled and leaves. And then you find out, oh, wait, they never signed, you know, the documents, right, to assign all the work that they've done to the company. I mean, that's a potentially expensive problem to go back and fix, because now they have a bunch of leverage. Or, you know, there's a bunch of those situations where, hey, there's a lot of upfront work that if you do it right from the beginning, you're going to avoid a bunch of pain later. Yeah. So, you know, I think there's a ton of resources now online, almost too many, that will guide you through the beginning stages. There's websites like Stripe Atlas and Clerky that will literally just, you know, tell you, hey, this is the vanilla way to start a company. Here's all the docs to sign. And they're good. I mean, they're really good tools. If you're starting out and trying to do it economically and just, you know, do it right, I think using one of those resources or one of those tools tactically is probably the strongest way to start out. And then just being serious about operations, like getting stuff signed. It sounds so boring or like simple, but again, it's a leverage problem where down the road, when you actually become a big company, it actually matters. You want to have done that stuff right from the beginning.
Adam, we have legal advice here. You could ask him anything.
Well, my biggest thing is like, what are the biggest frictions that you've seen between co-founders around equity split? Because I think I had started the company first, and then a year later my co-founder joined, and we restructured it because we wanted to take it to the next level, make it more VC fundable, and it was just like awkward in terms of knowing the right percentage. Like, do we vest him, or should we just start a new organization? I'm curious, like the biggest potholes maybe everyone's seen around that.
Yeah, I mean, I can give my 2 cents. I think there's a tendency to kind of think like the idea generation is worth more than it really is. Like, hey, I came up with the idea, so I should be, you know, 3/4 of this company. But in reality, like anybody that's gone through this journey would tell you, it's like, you know, ideas are great, but it's actually the execution and showing up day after day after day. And so in the grand scheme of things, setting up the right vesting schedule to me matters even more, because if somebody leaves after 6 months or a year, it's very unfair that they would have in the same ballpark of equity as somebody that's gutted it out for 3, 4, 5 years. So in the order of priorities, I'd say that's the most important. There are also tons of resources out there to help you divide the pie. Like there's a website, I think, called Founders Pie that you can go to, and it has a bunch of questions to help you split it up. But vesting by far between you and a co-founder or multiple co-founders is what matters.
That's good. Hey, I would love to know, just James, because you went through a co-founder leaving.
So I actually started Rapify. We had 3 co-founders in addition to me, so 4 co-founders, which I think is way too many. I learned that really quickly. One of them was a really good friend of mine who really was just trying to help me, and we gave him a co-founder title. And then the other 2 were technical co-founders. And what I'd say the biggest learning is you learn a lot about who somebody is when you go into business with them, especially at the co-founder level. So what we learned really quickly is they really weren't co-founders. They wanted to like get the business they wanted to get it to like MVP stage and sell it real quick before ever like doing anything with it. And so we didn't learn that until like a year into it. And I was paying them like with cash out of my pocket, in addition to giving them founder level equity. So we ultimately parted ways, and we got down to just 2 co-founders, and then eventually it was just me.
How did you part ways? Just so I want, because that sounds easier than it probably was.
Not easy. So like for example, the one that was really close friend, he's a very famous creative, works on like Ridley Scott films. He most recently designed the most recent Batmobile, like awarded creative. And so he helped us develop the brand assets. And we parted ways because he didn't want to be an employee. He didn't really want to do this. He's just trying to help me out. And it caused a rift in our friendship. And we didn't really start talking again for up until recently. And riding bikes is kind of the thing that kind of brought us back together. But like that, and a lot of people, I'd say like mixing friendship and business for me has not worked. So that was one big learning. The other is, you learn a lot about who somebody fundamentally is. You learn a lot about their character, what motivates them, what they're good at, what they're not good at. The bullshit filter gets evaporated very quickly when you go into business with someone. So I think that there's that. And also, like, I'm a bull in a china shop. I learned a lot about myself. And I think I also learned that, like, I don't think I can have co-founders. It's more of a personality and how I operate. So I think that's just the learnings of first time founder raising 13.6 million. Wow. You learn a lot about who you are and who you are back then. And I'm sure, Braden, you could attest to this, but like when you first started Sendoso, by the way, I got my Sendoso Rambler here.
Yes.
Who I was then and the fact that I was able to even raise this capital back then when I was just such a fucking idiot. And now like I know so much more about how to do this stuff. That's
amazing. James, that I love that. I'm curious, George, because you recently started your company. Like, how did you consider that co-founder piece? Obviously you are, but tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, there were a couple of things that came to mind as folks were talking that really resonates, just that I just wanted to touch upon, and I'll get to the current situation. What's interesting is that I have gone through so many of these, like getting lawyers, spending time and resources to like do the formal process for the incorporation and all the associated documents, and then the thing fails in like a couple months, and then it was a fucking moot point, right? At the same time, it's one of those paradoxes, right, where if like to Ibrahim, I hope I pronounced your name, to his point, if it does take off and you didn't do things properly, it could be a complete disaster, very difficult, expensive, even more time consuming. So it's that weird thing. But my experience has been, I've done stuff like really, low budget, just get stuff going just because I wanted some formality, right? to have early on. Like I literally have written documents that said in Google Doc myself, like, if this thing works out and XYZ, then we will then do it formally and put together C Corp and blah, 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 and all that. Right. So I've been.
When should you do that? Not to kill your flow, but like, when did you guys form companies? I was kind of wondering that too. Like, when should you go talk to someone like Ibrahim or Ibrahim?
We did LegalZoom to start, and that was a mistake because then we had to pay the lawyer to fix it.
Yeah, LegalZoom.
Most like venture law firms, and I could definitely talk about what not to do. But most of them have like a startup package where they'll do your corporate formation, all of your all the docs. It's like a package. It's like 10 grand, something like that. There's a cheap. I'm sure Ibrahim, you could talk about how it's how you could do it more on the cheap. But most of them have a like single checkbox. This is what it costs to get started. It's like a foot in the door thing.
Your lawyer could be a good funnel for sales too. Like we used ours a lot to like folks to reach out to that we knew were raising money or like were that process that might be good customers for us. So good intros are made to other founders for us in the early days.
Yeah, and some law firms have programs. Like I did 2 ventures where Wilson Sonsini gave us like $15K of like credit, I think it was. So shout out to Yoakum over there who was awesome. The first time I did it was for a startup that I did through AngelPad, which was the second cohort of AngelPad ever. I think was in the end of 2010. And so we got like that package, didn't have to pay for anything. That thing failed in like a couple, I think 6 months or so. And so I guess they write it off. And then I went back to Yoakum like a couple years later, and then he hooked me up with that program as well. So there are those experiences or those programs rather as well. And then I think you also mentioned Clerky. So I've used Clerky for a venture recently, and that's $250, and it's like the basic stuff, and you might have to fix stuff later on, but in a way it's a good thing if you have to go back and fix it.
I love that. I mean, I'm thinking back to like, so say you have $10,000, you have an idea, you have one person who wants to work on it with you. Do you go spend that on the idea and trying to prove it, or do you go and try to do some of the paperwork? Because I know what I did. I would love to ask everyone.
Yeah, well, I'll say like my bias is go and work on the idea and and extending your run rate or runway, etc. But others might have different opinions on whether to spend that on legal. I wouldn't. But again, that's just my experience in the beginning, right?
Yeah, what we did is we did discovery. When we started to feel like we had a signal on something and we were doing validation and we got some stuff validated, we actually got an arrangement where we deferred all our legal costs until we raised money.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons I got to work with Ibrahim. Not only did I know him before, but like there's some places that do that. What do you usually see? When do people usually do that for you, Ibrahim?
Yeah, I think as soon as you have third parties, it makes sense to get some formalization, and that could mean your co-founder. If it's just you and you're jamming away, I think you can. And there's some people out there probably in the back of the audience that'll say, well, I want to start my QSBS capital gains clock earlier, so start a company earlier. There's a provision in the tax code that if you have a company for 5 years, you own the stock, then gains up to $10 million are tax-free, blah, blah, blah. You could optimize for that. I kind of just think if you're trying to save resources, which every startup is, I would do it as soon as you have like somebody other than yourself. And yeah, for me, it's a binary. It's sort of like if you can get to a law firm, like you mentioned, like we do fee deferrals, and yeah, we have like a package deal. That's probably the best because you're saving your resources. You're just deferring them. But if you can't get one of those deals, because there's usually a filter, I would just go to Clerky or Stripe Atlas. I think they're pretty good. There's a question of like, you're not getting like advice about, what the best thing to do is. It's just a tool. You have to fill in the blanks. And if you know what you want, great. If you don't, it's challenging. But resource preservation, like, George said, is critical. So I'd go down one of those two paths. I wouldn't do kind of some weird middle where you're paying a lawyer a bunch of money up front, but it's not delivering value. I wouldn't do it that way.
Yeah, and then I also wanted to add, obviously it depends on where you're at, right? Like a lot of the companies that I started early on, I was like in college or straight out of college. I didn't have a pot to piss in, so 10 grand was a lot, right, for me. So this current venture, we did hire a firm to formalize it because there were a couple different things, but it was also after we did 200 customer discovery calls, and we started to go down a customer discovery path. So we felt a lot better about, okay, let's formalize it and those sort of things.
Braden, what did you do?
We did LegalZoom right away.
Oh,
which was a mistake, and then we had to hire a lawyer who we still have today to fix all of it. But like, it was important early days because you typically build a relationship there. There's a lawyer who helps with like red lines, who helps with like things like that. Like you need to kind of have somebody in place to help with that stuff. Like in the early days, we're like, I don't give a shit with these red lines. So I just sign it. Like it's like someone who's willing to pay us money. But I think like as you go through that, you get to a point where like term for convenience are big things I didn't know about that lawyers told you about, that you kind of get good at like learning how that stuff works. And so like those are just things that I would recommend to do earlier rather than later. To your co-founder point too earlier, I think it's important to talk about responsibilities as to which one wants to focus on certain things. And so like we did that early days. Like Chris wanted certain stuff, I wanted certain stuff, and I didn't want other things. I think that helps in the early days as well. Like for me, I wanted the lawyer and Chris did not.
So one last thing, because we are getting close to time on this thing, and we gotta start moving to the next session in a minute or two. I wanted to ask everybody who's been through the ringer with startups before, if you could go back and tell yourself something from when you first started, now what would you tell yourself? I think that let's go around the room and do that, and then we can call it.
I'll start. I hopefully most people don't have this problem in Silicon Valley, but being outside of the Valley, I was intimidated by working on a really, really big problem because I was like, I just don't even think. So we did something really small in like the higher education and environment, like, and we learned a lot, but it was just always, I had this mindset of like, oh, this isn't like the big thing. This is just like the first thing I'm doing in my early 20s, mid 20s, and I'll learn a lot, which is true. But I think that there's also something to be said about like going for a really, really, really big problem, because we never were able to get the funding that we could have. And people don't want to spend, it takes almost the same amount of time to work on a really big problem in terms of the fixed cost. So just considering that for me.
Yeah, for me, I mean, kind of echoing off of that, TAM, which is essentially what you're talking about. Like the TAM for this space, like out of home advertising is 8 billion in the US. And at the time when I started, I didn't really understand how that would have a effect on everything we did. And so like going into the next thing, like TAM needs to be, for me, like approaching 100 billion for it to be like something I'm going to really dive into. So that I think was a big, like, just, I didn't have the hindsight and understanding like the physical pain that trying to solve a problem with such a small TAM would actually require.
I think for me is if you do decide to raise money, which everyone should have that experience, that your board member you bring on is kind of like another marriage. So you spend it's not just 1 or 2 years, unless you're lucky, it's 8 years. It is 7 years. And so like, make sure that who you raise money from, and I love my board, but like make sure that who you take money from is somebody who you can work with and who believes in the vision that you have, and not just someone who's writing a check and just moving on.
Mr. Soto?
Yes, I would say that be mindful of like the work that you should do within yourself, and that your ability to stay calm and manage stress and not go down too many rabbit holes will impact your ability to make good decisions and those sort of things. And part of that is really working on, as hard as it is, detaching your identity from your business, whether it's at the idea stage or beyond, so you can better deal with the ups and downs that are inevitably going to come, and your emotional state won't be like this all the time. So I know, Adam, you sort of alluded to that earlier. I think that that's really important, and that's one thing that I feel really good about, at this stage of my career.
I think for me, I would say that don't get distracted by product. If you're having issues with acquisition or go to market or any of that stuff, I think people have a tendency around, even the people you work with and stuff will have a tendency to be like, oh, you really need to like nail down that product and have this feature be perfect and all that stuff. And I kind of think it's like a lot of it can also just be fixed with better marketing and sales. A lot of time. I don't know if that's a bad take or not, but that's kind of how I feel about it. Like 2 years ago, I basically like kept thinking through different things for functionality in the product, and what I should have been focusing on more is marketing and sales and how to say it and how to communicate it better. Ibrahim, do you have clients that have any advice? You want to like mirror what you hear from them?
No, I mean, I could react to what you just said, though. I think there's a bigger, point there, which is just if you ask 100 people what you should do, they're going to give you 100 pieces of advice, and you got to follow your conviction at the end of the day. I mean, there's no shortage of, advice, but not all of it's good. And so you got to have conviction in what you think is right.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming on today. We did everybody, right? We're not jerks. Adam, did we get everybody? We did it?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you for coming on. Hopefully if you watch this and you're like, oh man, maybe I'll start a startup someday. You can hit up all these guys. Everyone here is willing to help you. You've all been very, very helpful with getting Pitchfire off the ground for me. Like that's kind of why I asked these people to come on, is like, this is my group that's helped me a ton with growing the company and figuring out stuff and doing this for the first time. So please go add these guys on LinkedIn, work with them. You guys are amazing. Thank you for being on here.